a show of hands, whatever you're comfortable with, how many of you are caregivers, whether you're caring for children or caring for adults? Okay. All right. So we have
Mm.
quite a few. Yes, and I hope your mom is doing well, Linda. So wonderful. Oh, that's great. So quite a bit of caregiving going on. And I wanted to have that context because a lot of my work, I mean, my organization is called Mom's Hierarchy of Needs, so that'll give you a little bit of context. And I'll briefly explain what some of that is about. Let me show you the presentation. And we're going to put it into show mode. All right. Is everyone able to see the hierarchy? Wonderful. Okay. So I started this work almost 9 years ago. And when I first came up with the idea for the mom's hierarchy of needs, I had, it was because I completely burned out after my return to work from my second maternity leave, which is now 10 years ago. At the time, I had a newborn and a toddler. And although I was somewhat nervous about returning to work because I had taken on a promotion while I was pregnant, I was assured everything would be fine by my then organization. They're like, it's going to be fine. We've got your back. Don't worry about it. Within a couple of weeks of coming back, my manager at the time, he said, you're the most senior person on your team. Well, we had to move her into a different division and we can't actually backfill her because we're trying to demonstrate profitability. And then, oh, and also those new positions that we had, those open recs, we've had to close them because we're trying to demonstrate profitability. Within a few months of that, I had three people in one of my departments all have to go out on FMLA leave very suddenly, not parental leaves, unplanned, unfortunate reasons. So suddenly, I felt like I was in a new job. I was short-staffed. The organization had a new strategy, and I was being asked to bring my most strategic, clear-thinking self to the work when I was sleeping in 90-minute increments with a newborn and a toddler. And there were so many nights where I would just kind of try to shield the glow of my computer from my baby and the co-sleeper. I'd be typing away, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And like many of us, including, and I met someone earlier in this group, but including those of us who come from immigrant families or immigrant backgrounds, the answer is always to just work harder when you have a problem. That is always the answer. So I didn't raise any of my concerns. I felt like I could work my way through it. And because most of my career, I could outwork most people, but I was becoming depleted. I would drive to the office, which was a good 45 minutes to an hour away. There were a lot of days I didn't remember going there. I didn't remember how I got there. Some days I would go in, race through the parking garage, run up the stairs, and realize that I had left the breast pump at home. And I would have to drive all the way back. And it was the first time in my life where people who didn't really know me asked me if I was doing okay because I didn't look like I was doing well. So even though I was at the time a vice president in a public company, I didn't feel like I could raise my hands and say that I was struggling and that I couldn't work the same way. And because I was used to bringing solutions, not problems, it just felt too vulnerable. I'd also just been on leave, and I was the primary salary at the time, and our health insurance was through my employer. So for all those reasons, I just didn't feel like I could disclose what was going on. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. A job I loved became unsustainable. I went to a much larger company. I negotiated a 4-day work week. I had one direct report instead of two departments. And I took a 40% pay cut. And it still took over 2 years to recover from burning out. And it was in that kind of post 2 years where uh, a local founder had approached me because he kind of had heard about my work in go-to-market strategy and research, which is kind of what I'm known for. And he said, I have this device for stress. I'd really love your thoughts on it. And I said, okay. And I talked to him about it. I said, I think moms would be a great entry place. And he said, well, why? And I said, he said, why are moms so stressed? I'm like, well, there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then there's mom's hierarchy of needs. And it was a light bulb moment. I drew it on a little piece of paper. I turned it into a PowerPoint. And then I launched my first survey. Now I've heard from thousands and thousands of parents, caregivers, initially mothers, and in my work with organizations, they're much more gender neutral, gender mixed studies. But this resonated with people. And it was my realization that everything that we really care about, if we're caregiving for children or if we're caregiving for adults, in the bottom two-thirds, like their milestones, their health and well-being. And then if you get to that next layer, all the household responsibilities, which still, as everyone here knows, disproportionately fall to women in most families. And then you get to that next layer, professional role. The bottom two-thirds of the hierarchy are all things that can't be completed. They're never done, right? There's no finish line to your children's well-being. There's certainly no finish line to housework. I wish there was. Um, and it's a perpetual cycle of thinking, oh, well, when I have time, when everything's done, then I will, you know, pursue that PhD or call that friend or go for that walk or, watch that movie. We stay in the bottom two-thirds because they're perpetual responsibilities. And everything way up at the tippy top, everything that we need for our mental, physical, and emotional well-being, it gets kind of pushed aside. It's not really rewarded in our society to spend too much time up there. We're really lauded and celebrated for doing things in the bottom two-thirds. And then we can't make the time easily to get to the top. But I did do some advisory work for that mental health startup. And then I also went on to work for another mental health company. And after had all these incredible conversations with physicians and other researchers and clinicians, neuropsychiatrists, and I learned that, oh, those things at the top, we need them to reduce the stress hormone cortisol in our bodies. And we need to do that. Otherwise, it keeps rising, and chronic cortisol and chronic stress causes inflammation, and inflammation causes a whole host of problems. But I didn't know that that was what I needed. I just knew that I couldn't get there. So that's kind of what led to this work. And I have had the opportunity to speak about these challenges in a lot of organizations. I started overwhelmingly with mothers and with parents and caregivers, but I also have learned that a lot of these themes resonate for people who are trying to care for themselves, and are not in the caregiving space yet. Right now, we are at a really unique time. Um, I think the social climate is perhaps more divided than it's ever been, in my adult life. The political climate is ugly. We are navigating global conflicts that are happening around us and in the periphery and that affect many of the people in our communities very directly. We also have this post-pandemic reality where things are not really the same, and we're dealing with an economic meltdown that is damaging our ability to do a lot of the things that we love to do or to have the impact that we want to have. Life is expensive and complicated, and it's not surprising that we're stressed. I'll also just throw in that, you all know this as Lean In community members, but we're hasn't really worked for women. We are underrepresented in leadership. We are underfunded in our businesses. We are pushed out of the workforce at higher rates, especially after having children or as caregivers. And we are paid less for the work, even though we are doing incredibly meaningful things in every field. Um, Mothers in particular, and women in general, are drained from doing society's unpaid work in the home and in the workplace too. We are the ones who are building culture and creating connection and mentoring and making sure people are okay and doing all those thoughtful things that really are essential to culture building. But we're often not recognized for it, and we're not rewarded for it in the ways that we deserve. I share this chart. It's an eye chart. You don't have to like try to figure out exactly what's there. I'll explain. I have a study with now close to 4,000 parents that I started in March of 2020. It is still going. I believe it's the longest running study of its kind. It is 97% women. So it is overwhelmingly moms. I do run this same study, but adapted inside of organizations that I do work for. And the results are pretty similar, so even when we're not exclusively dealing with moms or dealing with parents. But in the beginning, people's self-care went way down in the start of the pandemic, but self-care is down even more now. And when people ask me why, I explain, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. The birthday, the birthday party circuit, sorry, the birthday party circuit is back. In-office time is back. Travel is back. We're being expected to do more and more, often with less resources. And we're taking from the top of the hierarchy, as I shared earlier, because when life gets busy, that's often the only place where we have some perception, right, of discretion to make changes. And as you all know well, it's hurting us, right? It's damaging. Women are at greater risk for stress-related illness of every kind: fatal heart disease, hypertension, anxiety, depression, autoimmune disorders. It's disturbing how much suicidality I see in my research study and have over the past 8 years since I've been conducting these studies. So a lot of people are not doing well, and the lack of self-care becomes its own kind of circular challenge. I'll also add, for those of you who might be leaders inside of organizations, when I'm talking to employers, I explained that it's not good for organizations either, right? It's devastating for people and their families and for communities. But organizations don't win when people crash, burn, and suffer in their physical and mental health. So, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the post-pandemic infrastructure just isn't what it was. And it's the infrastructure that mostly women are responsible for inside of families. So, when's the last time you tried to book a specialist, right? For yourself, for your kids, for your parents, for anyone. I mean, how long did it take? I realized after we were kind of out of the height of the pandemic that my husband and I both needed to get colonoscopies. Fun topic. But I mean, I had to make it a part-time job to get them scheduled. I was on a wait list, then I was kicked off the wait list. Then I was on another wait list, and then I had an appointment, and the doctor suddenly went on leave, and I didn't have an appointment. I mean, it took months. And if you are the chief medical officer, which in 80% of families is the woman in the family, you are interacting with appointments and scheduling and finding the right person and finding the right specialist for yourself, possibly for your children and your other loved ones. And it's a part-time job. If again, if you are caring for kids, the education industry has completely shifted post-pandemic. Healthcare and education were the two hardest hit, and all industries were affected. But teacher shortages, worker shortages, lack of capacity, receiving 50 emails from the school instead of five, right, in a given week. All of those things kind of tax our mental energy and our time. And for anyone who's on the socioeconomic margins, for anyone who's from a marginalized community, people of color, those who are disabled, those who are LGBTQ plus, any otherness has made the current climate that much more corrosive, and it stokes a lot of fear. And not everyone is recovering from pandemic conditions at the same rate. So all those things are happening. And I'll just touch on this. I mean, everyone wants to be excellent at everything, right? No one wants to be a bad mother or daughter or worker or friend. And when you feel like you're doing poorly at every role that is deeply connected to your identity, nobody wins. And you feel worse and worse about yourself. And it sets up this cycle. Women are also just like drowning in guilt. I'm sure this is not new to anyone here. And we feel like we should be available to everyone all the time. So, what are your options? Because I gave you the bad news. We're going to shift into the things that are helpful and that work. Um, the question that I like to ask, and feel free to drop it in the chat if you feel comfortable sharing. But I'll ask people, what makes you, and I asked this in the research study too, what makes you feel like you are caring for yourself? You probably know those things that really feel restorative and become a source of fuel in your daily life, whether that's a walk, whether that's a call with a friend, whether that's seeing people you love, whether that's like gliding in the ocean, whatever it looks like, you probably know what it is. Um, in the research study, most people know what me time or better time or self-care time looks like, and they kind of know how they want to spend that time. The problem is always getting to that point. So I'm going to talk about barriers and how to kind of work your way under or over them. These are not easy problems to solve. Women have been writing about these problems literally since like the 1950s and 60s. I learned in the book by Bridget Schulte, Overworked, How to Work, Love, and Play When No One Has the Time. And I interviewed her for that book. The concept of women's leisure didn't even exist until like the 1900s. Like women's leisure didn't exist. And think about it, right? We kind of spin ourselves in circles and stay busy, and it's part of how we're socialized. But there are limits to how well that can work. There are limits to how effectively you can operate if you are living every moment of every day in service to others. So I think you have to start by believing that stress is bad for you and not just bad for you in terms of it making you feel bad, but that it's actually bad for your longevity and for your health and for your quality of life. So if we kind of start with that as the first ground rule, then we can move to the next one. Boundaries are, I think, a mess for women. We're always told to set boundaries. Boundaries are like lauded as the answer to everything. And they don't really work very often or very consistently for us. And I tackle that in the book. I tackle that a lot in my conversations because, you know, you have to have some context, first of all, for when boundaries aren't going to work for you. And it's extremely personal. So I did a more qualitative study. I had just under 200 women, all moms in that particular study. And what I saw was that and there was a lot of open ends that were fascinating, right? One woman said, if it's someone that I know, then I feel like there's trust and I can tell that person that I don't want to do the thing and I can set the boundary. For others, it's the complete opposite. Oh, if it's someone I know, I'm afraid of disappointing them. But if it's a stranger, I can set the boundary because I'm not concerned about what they think. And it's it's very personal. So what matters about this chart is just you to know what it is for you, right? Obviously, if you're tired or overwhelmed or depressed or anxious or feel like you have to please others or you feel guilt, you're not going to set boundaries as well. If you are under financial pressure and you're in a role where maybe you want to be home by 6 o'clock so you can have dinner at a decent time with your family, but oh, there's an opportunity for a sales event or a conference or a networking event that could change your whole trajectory in your career. It's very hard to hold that boundary under those circumstances. And then relationship, right? Most people felt pretty comfortable setting boundaries with their children because that's kind of what parenting is. But when you're talking about with a spouse, it's a different story. If you're talking about with your own family, my family of origin is my kryptonite. So I'm going to say yes and do ridiculous things for them, even if I don't have the time at times. My notes app, when people say, hey, I would really, really love for you to be on X, Y, or Z. And I know that I don't have capacity or I don't have the time. I also am a very avid volunteer. I love to volunteer. That's another kryptonite area for me because I really love to volunteer and I can overdo it. So, understanding, do you have the social power or the relationship capital that you need in the situation where you're trying to set the boundary? Do you have psychological safety? In the study, less than 4% feel like they can raise their hands and ask their managers for what they really want at work. So it might be a setting where you don't feel psychologically safe. And if you just get asked a question out of the blue and you don't have an answer prepared, and it's one of your tr tricky areas where it's challenging for you to advocate for yourself, you can be caught off guard, right? So all of those things can affect how it works for you. Um, I'll kind of speed past this because I've talked about it, but advocating for yourself through others is can be really effective, especially in the workplace. If you have an employee resource group that you're part of, for other women, for other parents, for other leaders, for other caregivers, you can talk to people and express what your needs are and ask how they've handled it in the same organization. And perhaps come together as a group and say, wow, that big company meeting should not be at 8 a.m. because many of us have drop-off responsibilities then. And could it be shifted? But you don't have to ask for yourself because, as I shared, it doesn't always work. The other kind of category that I want to spend a little time on is fuel and making sure you understand how to refuel and create more energy for yourself. I'm not going to spend time on time check. I do have an app that tracks your self-care time when you have time. Take a look at it. It's great. But wellness time is not equal. So I often will tell the story. I had someone in one of my parent groups for an employer who said, "Oh, I really am interested in running the marathon, and I'm like getting ready to do it, and I'm having a lot of trouble training for it." And so we talked through it. I'm like, "Well, where are you having trouble?" It turns out this is a early morning person who has several children who's trying to train for the marathon at night. and and I just said, you if you are a morning person, then starting your training at night is probably not the right thing. Um, if you have work, deep work that requires a lot of time for reflection or thought or clarity, don't start it at a time of day when you are exhausted or drained. Think about that intersection, that little sweet spot, like right in the middle here, where you have sufficient time to do the thing that you want. Sometimes, if you decide, oh, I have to write that presentation, but I have 10 minutes, let's go. and you're going to be interrupted because you only have 10 minutes. Like, look at your calendar and try to carve out a space where you have sufficient time. Maybe you need 45 minutes to work on a presentation. It's at a time of day where you have the energy to do so. And if you're a caregiver, you have the coverage to do so. So that's the sweet spot. And if you start to build, and I'm not going to go too deep into ideal calendars, I'm going to give you an example though, because you can start to build your version of your ideal calendar around knowing these things. And it's never going to be perfect. It's not going to be the same every day. You're going to have weeks where everything goes sideways. But if you start from that place of setting a little goal, in this case, it's like, I want to walk every day for 15 minutes. I see a lot of that in the study. Probably one, as I shared earlier, one of the top things that people want more time for is movement or exercise. So if you want to walk every day for 15 minutes, you have to find that energetic space. So you might decide, okay, I'm going to take a 15-minute walk after I drop off my kids at school. I go for my run in the morning, usually after I drop off my kids. This morning was different because it's Saturday. My son's in track. My daughter has a soccer game. So I had to do breakfast and get things ready and get things set up. And then I went for a very quick run right before this presentation. So you kind of find your window that's going to be the right window for you. And you anticipate possible barriers. So in this case, it might be, oh, after drop off, maybe some other parent wants to talk with me, or I might have a meeting in the morning and I'm not sure how to handle that situation. So the absolute best thing I've come up with, right? It's having a plan A, B, and possibly C for anything that's important to you in your self-care categories. So there are mornings like this morning where I went for a very short run, different route because I didn't have a lot of time to work with. There have been mornings before a business trip where I will run at the gym at 5:30 in the morning and go there in the dark and have 10 minutes or 15 minutes to go for a little tiny run. There are times I will be dressed in my running clothes and go on an airplane for a business trip and get there and ask the hotel if I can run in the hotel gym and get showered and dressed before meetings. So I have like 6 variations of what it means to go running. One of them is my preferred one. The other 5 are, suboptimal. They're not my perfect thing, but it still fuels me to be somebody who runs every day. And I know it's good for my mental health. And I started it for my mental health, although it also benefits my physical health. And I'll do one other because I think we have time for it. I haven't hit my limit yet. Another goal that comes up all the time with people is sleep. It's incredibly hard to hold on to that. um, Sleep is another category that we trade off all the time. But if you want to get 30 minutes more sleep, then you say, okay, I'm going to start winding down for bed maybe at 9:30 at night. Geeky fun fact, you get better sleep if you go to bed by 10 o'clock. Um, I've read all these incredible sleep books. I research everything in this category in addition to my own primary studies. I do a lot of interviews and research, but there's a thing in your brain that starts to like release a hormone at a certain time of day, and you will sleep better if you go to bed by 10. Of course, not everybody can go to bed by 10, but let's say you want to wind down at 9:30. And then you think, oh, my kids are never in their rooms and ready for bed at their target time. So that means I'm not going to be able to be asleep at my target time. So, or my partner really wants to watch TV and I'm sitting out there watching TV and it's an hour and then I'm not going to be able to get to sleep. Whatever that looks like for you, right? Have a backup plan, right? Have a response for your kids. Like first one in your room gets an extra treat at dinner tonight. If you're partnered, I'd love to have you start putting the kids to bed instead of me putting the kids to bed so that I can get a little bit more sleep. Enlisting help, having a conversation with your family if it's age appropriate, right? Around your goals and your needs and how you're changing things up at night so that you can get 30 more minutes of sleep. Um, those tactics, it seems really rudimentary, but everything really comes back down to your calendar. Everything you want to accomplish, everything you want to invest in ultimately comes down to where you can put in the time for it. So I kind of center a lot of the self-care work around that. So I have a challenge here for you to put something on your calendar for next week. I'd love for everybody to take a very quick look. Don't look at messages, don't get sucked into email. But if you can take 2 minutes to take a look at your calendar, find a space, ideally a 60-minute or a 90-minute space. If you don't have that, take a 15-minute space, whatever you find, and just block it. If it's a work calendar that's shared with other people, call it personal, call it an appointment, whatever you would like to call it, just block the time. And then in time, I would love for you to repeat that calendar entry and make it a recurring meeting with yourself every week. Because if the space is there, you will be surprised at how much that changes your likelihood that it's going to happen. And if you start with it every week with one space and it becomes a weekly thing, it's going to become that much easier to start to create a daily space and a space that you can protect with boundaries, with having unapologetic clarity that you have to care for yourself and it is in everyone's best interest around you. And you're having a strategy of boundaries on how to navigate and block and tackle when that time, when people are trying to grab the time from you. And if you keep in the back of your mind one boundary that's been really challenging for you to keep, come up with a script for it. Put it in your notes, have it at the ready, and the next time that circumstance comes up, take a look back at it and then feel like restored, that you have the talk track that you feel comfortable with, and you can start to enforce that boundary in a way that feels good to you or enlist others if it's a work boundary. Okay, we've covered a ton. I know I'm out of time. Pay attention to repeated areas of stress. Look for the friction. The friction is part of the answer. If it's always in the mornings, if it's always when you want to go for a walk, if it's always when you're trying to leave work, whatever it is, find that friction point and problem solve around that. Remember, not all time is equal. Look for that space where you have sufficient time and sufficient energy to do the thing. And frequency is more important than perfection. Your A, B, C, D plans for a walk or extra sleep or yoga or time with friends, whatever it is, it's not going to work every day, and that's okay. It's totally okay. It's going to work some of the time. I will stop sharing now.